Prepare your screens for otherworldly proportions. What you are about to see are hair-raising, bone-rattling, earth-shattering locations beyond human imagination. Critics hail going to the movies. Now he brings you the jolting, jiggling, gelatinous filming locations of The Blob.
Welcome back, moviegoers. It is Ryan of Going to the Movies, and today we're in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, preparing for Blobfest, a celebration of 50 sci-fi horror B-movies held at the Colonial Theatre, one of the filming locations from perhaps the cultiest, B-moviest film of that era, The Blob. And one scene, teenagers run out of the theater in fear as the Blob attacks, and that scene is annually recreated by fans. I first attended Blobfest in 2016, when I could have been mistaken for The Blob. Here's me and Virginia participating in the run-out. I got to return last summer for the festival's 25th anniversary and experience the fun once again. And of course, this time, I hit all the locations, including, I believe, a newly unearthed spot. But let's start in Yellow Springs. Good News Productions, aka Valley Forge Productions, was the creative team behind The Blob, and their studio was an historic village complex called Yellow Springs located in West Pikeland Township. They operated here from 1952 to 1974, and they were mostly known for doing religious-themed short films, that is, until producer Jack H. Harris approached them about shooting a monster movie. Shorty Yeaworth, who ran Good News Productions, figured that learning to produce secular feature-length films could be a great way to up the production value of their religious pictures, so he agreed to direct The Blob. They owned most of the buildings here in Yellow Springs, but there were three main stage buildings. Studio C here, Studio B, which burned down and was never rebuilt, and this is Studio A. This building right here was Good News Productions Studio A, so the majority of The Blob would have been filmed in here. This was their main soundstage area, the biggest building. And we know for certain that the cabin scenes were done in here. And there were two cabin sets. So the first one is when he's on the porch. That is a regular sized cabin. And then when he's at the crater, you can see the cabin in the background. That is all forced perspective. That cabin was actually only about 3 feet tall. The offices for West Pikeland Township, which is where Yellow Springs is located, is now what occupies this building, as well as Salt Performing Arts. There is a black box theater in there. So it's very cool. They're still doing that sort of thing in the building. It's a farmhouse built in 1845 originally, and I read this, I believe, on West Pikeland's historical section on their website, that this building over here, which is now the police station for the township, was originally the chicken coop for the farm, but when it was Good News Productions, this is their prop house. So all the props that may have been used in The Blob probably sat in this building at one point, including the Blob itself. So whenever I do filming locations, I love to learn the history of the buildings when it was a filming location, but I don't always include a lot of those details because I don't know if viewers are particularly interested in that or just want to see the spots, so let me know. But it's hard not to do that here because there's so much history at this place. Different types of history. There's Civil War history, there's Revolutionary War history. So I'll talk a little bit about that. This was a 4-story building that burned down a long time ago, but this was a Revolutionary War hospital originally, and then it was repurposed over the years. It was first a hotel, and then it was a classroom building for orphans of Civil War soldiers. Then it was an art studio, and eventually became part of Good News Productions as Studio B. This was primarily where they would edit films, as well as keep a lot of gear like lighting, audio, stuff like that. They did have a stage in here, so it's possible certain scenes from The Blob could have been filmed in here, but I don't think that was the main purpose of this building. So it burned down in 1902 originally, but it was rebuilt, and then it burned down again while Good News Productions actually occupied the building. That was in 1962. Shorty Yeaworth witnessed the fire. He ran in, was able to save a lot of reels, but a lot of stuff from Good News Productions was lost during that fire, unfortunately. All right, inside of Studio C. This is an old building built in the 1700s. It was originally a stable for horses. It's been repurposed many times before Good News Productions and many times after. It's now an art studio. So artists will have residencies here. They'll teach classes like pottery, sculptures, all sorts of things. You can see how it would work great as a small sound stage. The ceilings are really high, so you could rig lighting up there. I would guess that they probably had to cover up this gigantic skylight. But yeah, I asked Historic Yellow Springs, the guy at the office there, very nice dude. He said that this was primarily used as sound stages, so scenes were filmed in here. I knew that they probably filmed in here, but I was curious if it was a multi-purpose building because, you know, it wasn't originally designed to be a movie studio. So I figured they probably did some other things, but as far as they know, it was just used as a sound stage. So Blob scenes were filmed in here, and that's pretty cool. There's so much history here in Yellow Springs. I definitely recommend it for Blob fans, even if you're not into the other history of Yellow Springs, you just want to know about the Blob, you're not worried about Good News Productions in general, I still say it should be on your list if you come out to Blobfest. Don't just stick to the Colonial because there's so much here. Come when the office is open. Historic Yellow Springs, they'll take you through the town, show you where everything was. I'm going to show you a couple more houses where everybody stayed, and then we'll head to some spots. This right here was Shorty Yeaworth's house, director of the Blob, and the guy who ran Good News Productions and Valley Forge Productions. He lived in this house, so this is where he would go home every night after shooting. And this building is where Steve McQueen stayed during the Blob, according to Historic Yellow Springs. Now, when this was an orphanage for Civil War veterans' kids, this was the infirmary, and they split it, boys and girls, and that's why there are two stair sets that lead into a wall. Now they just have the one over to the left that actually leads to the door, but there were doors there at one time. So interesting little threads of the past there. But yeah, Steve McQueen stayed in this building, very different on the inside now. Apparently this is also where they had their screening room for Good News Productions. If the Yellow Springs office is open for tours, they'll let you in the Washington building, and it's called that because George Washington, Anthony Wayne, and Alexander Hamilton set up a headquarters here during the Revolutionary War. Good News Productions owned the building nearly 200 years after that, so unfortunately, those founding fathers didn't get to check out these sweet displays. This case, full of Good News artifacts, didn't contain anything Blob specific, but it was really cool to see some of the things like the slate and the makeup mirror. Before we leave Yellow Springs, there is one then and now matchup shot we can do, which is right on the road in front of Studio A, where they supposedly shot the scene where Olin Hallen runs across the road as the Blob is beginning to eat him. I only found one source for this location, which was a link to a driving tour from the Colonial Theatre's website, but it appears to be correct. In this matchup, you can just see the pipeline markers in my shot and the movie's shot. There's also a telephone pole in the right spot and what looks like a driveway, which is consistent with where we're standing. That was actually randomly Randy who noticed the pipeline markers in the movie. Make sure to subscribe to his channel linked below. He's got more filming locations, he's got theme park videos, and the occasional going to the movies behind the scenes videos. Here's one more matchup that's kind of funny because you can see what I'm assuming is a crew member standing off to the side. But very economical location here, right in front of their main soundstage. And now it's time to head to Phoenixville. So we've arrived at Doc Hallen's house. This is where he lived and where he worked out of. So his doctor's office was inside of the house, so that's why they brought the old man here just before he was leaving for a conference. And the current owner, Terry Saunders, I believe also lives in this house and works out of here, but she's a hairstylist. Terry and her husband have owned Doc Hallen's Queen Anne Victorian-style house since the mid-'80s. The earliest owner I could find was John Switzer Dismont, who originally ran a jewelry store in town and later became a well-to-do banker. At one point, he was the president of the National Bank of Phoenixville, whose former building is now a part of the Colonial Theatre. A newspaper article described him as having, quote, a friendly, helpful nature, but his business principles were always sound. He lived until the age of 92, passing away right here in this house in 1927, and his obituary stated that he was one of the most well-known members of the Phoenixville community, and his death was a, quote, subject of conversation wherever men and women were congregated. The property remained in his family's possession until his adopted granddaughter, biologically his great-niece, sold it in 1941 to Dr. Tolbert Bryson Strews Jr., and that is who owned it when the Blob filmed there in 1957. He was a doctor of osteopathic medicine, and I couldn't find any record of him running a practice out of his home, but it is interesting that the Doc's house was, in fact, a Doc's house when they shot the Blob. Don't forget, though, that all interiors were done back at Yellow Springs. When Steve and Jane bring the cops back to Dr. Hallen's house, they pull up right here, and I wonder if that tree right there is the little bitty tree that was there when they filmed the movie. When Steve McQueen sees the doctor get eaten by the Blob through the window, it's implied that he walks around this side of the house and looks in, but I think as soon as he goes around here and it cuts, we're back on a set, because when the Blob is eating the doctor, you see the wall wobbling. Not many Blob locations still give the opportunity to match up the then and now shots, so even though this establishing shot is a painting, I figured I'd go ahead and get the matchup. After dropping off the old man, Steve and Jane find some angry teenagers waiting for them out front. They'd sped past them on the way to the doc's house, and the teens were not happy about it, so they challenged Steve to a drag race, and they end up deciding to do it backwards. It looks like they're racing down this street, but in reality, that was shot in Pottstown, about 20 minutes away. In all my research of Blob filming locations, and I dug deep. Now, a lot of people have dug deep into Blob filming locations, and I never saw Pottstown listed anywhere as somewhere where they filmed. It's not far from everything else, but I found a newspaper clipping that mentioned not the Blob and not Molten Meteor, the working title, but it did say Good News Productions' first science fiction film they're working on. And it said it was a hot rod and a regular car, and they drag race and one goes through the light. Now, that article came out the day after they shot the scene, so I think it's safe to say that it's definitely filmed here. Now, you can't really see anything. There is a speed limit sign in one of the shots where the cop's talking to Steve McQueen, and there is a pole in the background of one of the shots, but that would have been replaced at some point. Also, you see there's a stoplight on every corner now, but we could look at each of them. I'll go around clockwise here and talk about why it could be a candidate for the spot or why it may not be. All right, so this is Beach Street looking up towards the intersection. I think this could be a candidate for being the correct road. However, there's a cemetery to the right. And if you remember, there's a shot of the police officer parked and you see Steve McQueen pass behind him. There's nowhere to park in that way along the side of this road, which is pretty much the same as it was in 1957, looking at historic aerial photos. Now, they could have filmed that specific shot somewhere else and used this part of the road. So that's why I'm not gonna say definitively, no, it's not here. So I'm calling this one a maybe. Let's keep going. Let's assume that all of the shots were done relative to each other in the same way that the movie implies. So let's say the cop was parked on that street off to the left, and this was the street that they drag raced backwards down. That means Steve McQueen would have stopped around here. These houses were there when they filmed, but you only see trees behind him. So that would imply that this is not the spot. However, there could have been more trees at the time. And also, again, maybe the shots weren't actually relative to each other in the way that they're implied by the movie. Let's go to the next street. All right, looking at the other side of Beach Street, I'm facing away from the intersection because I want to show you things we're looking for. So we got the street on the left there where the cop could have been parked. You do have trees lining the road here, but what leads me to believe that it might not have been here is the fact that this road kind of goes uphill. Now, it doesn't translate on camera as much, so it could have been, but I mean, if you were filming a backwards drag racing scene, would you choose the road that goes uphill? I don't know. And the other side of Keene is our last street that we're gonna check, obviously, because it's the last one that there is. And it's very uphill, so I don't think it was this one. Also, there's not much of a shoulder on the other side, though maybe the cop was sitting in this driveway. So clearly it's impossible to tell which street they used without firsthand knowledge or some set photos or anything like that. But it is cool to know that this was the intersection where they passed the light. Another piece to the Blob filming locations puzzle found. We are stopping now in the parking lot where supposedly the garage, the car mechanic, was located. Now, I've never seen anyone confirm this outside of a YouTube video, and I almost never use another YouTuber's videos for research, and that's because I don't want to accidentally subconsciously steal anything, and I would just rather find locations on my own. But when I was Google searching locations, a video popped up on Google as a suggested thing to watch, and it was a specific location. I saw that and I was like, garage location? I didn't know that existed. I thought that was a set, but he said it was filmed right here. It was Retro Rest Stops video. He's got a really cool channel. You should check it out. I'm gonna link all of his stuff below. Since filming this, I've spoken directly with David of Retro Rest Stop, and he told me it was local knowledge he had from living in the area for a long time. Still, let's see what we can confirm. First, there are two big windows here side by side, and take note of the distance between them. Now look as this guy leaves. You see a little partition, and then there's a back door to the right, and that's about all we get. It's a pretty standard garage, I guess, but check this out. If we go to 2012 on Google Street View, all the bay doors are open. You look in the bays on the left and the windows are way too far apart, plus there's no door back there. But in the two bays on the right, you can see two similarly shaped windows with about the same distance between them as the movie. Plus, there's a back door in the right spot. I really wanted a better view of this, so I found the company that used to operate in here, Clark's Auto Repair, and went back on their Facebook until I found this picture from October of 2009. What do you guys think? Another thing I looked at was historic aerials, just to make sure that building was actually there when they filmed the movie, and I found that it was. Looks like that office on the right side and the 2 bays on the left were added on later, but the section of the building that matches the Blob's garage scene was there. I'm thinking the local knowledge is correct here. When it comes to Blob locations, you got the Colonial Theatre, you got Doc Hallen's house. Pretty cool, but does anything beat this Dollar General?
I mean, nothing beats Dollar General.
This shopping center right here is the Lewis Road Plaza, and this is where Jerry's Market was located. The building has been changed a few times throughout the decades, so let's go and break it down. Now, in 1957, when they filmed, none of the stuff on the side was here. It was about from Dollar General on to the right. Sorry about the focus. And the roof was more arched. Supposedly you could still see it behind what's in the front there now. There's an old newspaper ad for Jerry's that shows you kind of what the whole building looked like from the front, from about this angle. It's a drawing, it's not a picture, but you can see how it was shaped. So it was the length of what you're seeing, but the arched part was shorter. It didn't reach all the way from left to right. There's no establishing shot, so this is the best view of the building as seen in the movie. You can see just a little bit of the J and Jerry's right here. Here's a behind the scenes photo where you get a much better view. And all those additional stores to the left of the original building were added in 1960, just 2 years after the release of the Blob. And this image right here is from the grand opening, which included a laundry cleaners and a 5 and dime. Jerry's Market provided 2 1960s Ford Falcons giveaways for the event. And here's what that section of the building looks like now. So yeah, visually speaking, not a very interesting location. I think it looked a lot cooler in the 1950s, but I do enjoy these spots and going here and doing the research because you get to dig through all the history of this area. I mean, it's a strip mall. I definitely wouldn't have been researching a strip mall in the middle of Pennsylvania if it weren't for the Blob. But it's fun. You look at the old newspapers, look at the old pictures, see how people were living life in the different decades, and see how we got from point A to point B over time. Right here on the corner of 4th and Main is what is sometimes referred to as the Mystery Corner, I think because it was a difficult location to find for the original folks who sought out the Blob locations back in the early days of location hunting. But I'm calling it the intersection, and this is what you see when the kids come running around the corner. Now, there was a building catty corner to me from the intersection. That is not there anymore, but you can see the building on the right side still here. The stairs on the right side, the kids come running around it, and we realize that they are running from the movie theater. I was really curious what that building in the background was, so I reached out to the Springford Historical Society to ask them, and they let me know that it was the Central Hotel. This is the only known photo where you can see the building. It's off to the side here, but it's enough to see that the windows match its appearance in the movie. The hotel suffered a pretty bad fire in 1972, but it was already slated to come down anyway due to Royersford's urban renewal plans. All right, next up, we're finally headed to the Colonial Theatre. The Colonial Theatre opened in 1903 as the Colonial Opera House and originally featured musicals and vaudeville shows. But it wasn't long after that they started showing movies, and it's one of the best movie-going experiences in the country. Blob or no Blob. Now we're going to go up to the balcony, which is where any shot of an audience watching a movie in the movie was filmed. That includes the scene where Steve and Jane go and tell the other teenagers that a monster's on the loose. But I think the best shot to match up is this shot where the camera tilts up from the audience to the projection booth. That shot of the Blob coming through the projection ports is actually a miniature recreation of the back wall. If you're lucky enough to catch a screening of the Blob at the Colonial, I recommend watching it from up here. You can check out this plaque they have commemorating the scene, and before the movie starts, you can look through the window and see where the projectionist was eating. Bob, the director of programming for the Colonial, was nice enough to allow us into the room, and I got a little distracted because we were nerding out about 35mm showings and what events were coming up at the theater, but I did manage to get a couple matchups. This shot facing the door to the room from the upstairs area, and I love this one because at first it's kind of hard to see that it's the same place, but look at this little handle. Still the same one. And whatever this thing is still there too. Back outside, you can see how they've altered the entrance. Part of what used to be outside is right inside the front doors, so it's difficult to do the matchups out here. One thing I wanted to point out, though, is that in this shot facing away from the theater, you see a building behind Steve McQueen called the Bootery. I was able to track down its address and confirm that that is what is now the dim sum restaurant. The Colonial Theatre is one of my favorites in the country, and I'd probably be here a couple times a week if I lived in the area, because they got first-run releases, cult classics showing in 35mm, even silent film screenings with a live organist. It's rare for one of these kinds of theaters to have survived this long in a smaller city. If you're ever around Phoenixville, I obviously recommend it, and of course, it's worth the visit for Blobfest. Walking up to where the teenagers go and grab the fire extinguishers because they figure out how to kill the Blob. Barclay Elementary was originally Memorial Junior High School that fed into Phoenixville High School, and it opened in 1930. It was renovated in 1990, and it wasn't these doors that the actors ran into. It was actually around the left side here. This is briefly shown in the Blob when they run to go get the fire extinguishers, but car pulls up right about here. It's actually on the sidewalk. Everybody hops out and they run in towards here. They can't get inside because the school is obviously locked. So one guy comes over here, grabs a rock, and breaks what would have been this window, the bottom left window on the right door. These doors are obviously newer. They've been replaced, but the bricks, the stonework surrounding the door, all still the same. Here's a matchup of a still that I found on the Criterion Blu-ray of the guy standing right up there. As you can see, the current diner is not what was here when they filmed the movie. In fact, it was replaced only a few years after the movie came out. A guy named Vince Tolucci bought it, decided he wanted a more modern appearance, and a lot of people for some reason think that it was shipped out west. But according to Mr. Downingtown, a Facebook page who goes around the town and shares what's going on with all the residents, he interviewed this guy, Vince Tolucci, who says he took it apart with his own hands. So it was demolished, but placed on the exact same foundation. Despite the main part of the diner being completely different now, I think it's still worth the visit because you still got that diner feel, and the current owners embraced the Blob history. I had some trouble finding pictures of the old diner, but there is this great one showing the front during the day. This is from the Criterion Blu-ray. Criterion Collection also has a production photo taken from, I believe, that fire escape there to your left. Looking out over the parking lot, you can see all the rigging they had for the lights and the camera equipment and all that stuff. And you can see the buildings across the street. A lot of them gone now. I reached out to the Downingtown Area Historical Society to see if they had anything, and they sent me this photo taken during a parade. It wasn't dated, but they guessed that it was sometime after the Blob was there. The Jerry O. Mahoney Diner Company manufactured prefabricated railcar-style diners, including the original Downingtown diner that you see in the Blob. Now, that company folded in 1952, 6 years before the release of the Blob, but a couple of their diners are still being used today if you wanted to visit those for that extra Blob-like experience. This matchup faces away from the diner and shows the cops pulling up into the parking lot, and for some reason I got really fixated on figuring out what this neon sign said. Since it's dark, it's the only part of the building you can see, but the depth of field makes it impossible to read. I did some digging and found out a company called Weathermaster operated out of that building, so I asked the Downingtown Area Historical Society if they had any images of that, and they sent me this picture, taken a year after the Blob's release, and from the other side of the sign, but clearly showing what it says: Weathermaster Window Company, storm windows and doors. More recently, it was a Napa Auto Parts, and then the building was vacant for a little while, and now this empty lot is all that remains. It was torn down just a couple years ago, but immortalized just barely in the Blob. Blobfest 2024 is in the books. Thank you guys for coming along to see all the locations, and thank you, Randy, for coming along with us. What did you think of your first Blobfest?
It was amazing. I loved it. It was excellent. It was fun.
I think it's such an adrenaline rush running out of the theater. I think any film fan should add Blobfest to their bucket list, whether you like sci-fi horror from the 50s or not. Like, it's just a cool event. That's going to be it for the video. Make sure to click here for another video. Click here for a playlist of all of our videos. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.